Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're all watching the chaos on the campuses, driven by the most pervasive form of hate in the history of the world is anti-Semitism. And to see that break out on our own campuses here in America has been truly stunning. Actually, if you look at this, it's not distinguishable from what's going on in the Middle East, where you have a country like Iran, which seems to exist only for the purpose of trying to wipe out Israel to finance these proxies like we saw in Gaza. This is a truly disturbing thing. I think the best answer to it on these campuses is what our former colleague Ben Sass said at the University of Florida. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we're not a babysitter here. They know what the rules are, and if they break the rules, they get the consequences. It's worked at the University of Florida. The so-called elite schools ought to try controlling their campus.
Well, as the leader pointed out, Republican senators have, I think, had it up to here with these vile anti-Semitic protests that we're seeing on our college campuses around the country. In fact, one report said that there have been 1,400 such protests since the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. And that is a 700% increase over the previous year. So what should be happening on our college campuses is they shouldn't be shutting down classes like Columbia University did. They should be shutting down this kind of violence. And this administration needs to step up and do its job and enforce the law. Last week, a number of us signed a letter to the Department of Justice and the Department of Education that was led by Senator Cotton, and I applaud him for leading this effort, basically calling on the administration to take the steps that are necessary to enforce the law and to protect Jewish students on our campuses. There is no place for this kind of anti-Semitic behavior in this country. It needs to be dealt with once and for all. And so I'm hopeful that the administration will take heed. I'm hopeful that these leaders and the administration on these college campuses will do the right thing and make sure that they are protecting Jewish students and all students that attend those universities. And just with respect to what's happening here in the Senate, there is a Circuit Court nominee, Adil Manji, who is up, and Senator Graham, who is the Republican leader on the Senate Judiciary Committee, identified parts of his record that is now coming to light and his involvement in a lot of anti-Israel organizations in his past. And so I hope that is a nominee that this administration will pull down, because clearly that's not the kind of person that we want on the federal court.
Violent mobs are continuing to sweep across America's campuses, and these are anti-Jewish mobs, pro-Hamas mobs. We have Jewish students on campus who are hearing the kind of threats that their great-grandparents heard in Nazi Germany. And yet the Biden administration and Democrats across the country refuse to act. Jewish students have actually been chased out of the classroom and off campus. And yet university administrators, they cater to the mobs. The pro-Hamas terrorists have been out there shutting down classrooms, and they have canceled classes today at UCLA. Commencements have been canceled. When you have college, university presidents, administrators who put extremism ahead of education, they deserve to lose their jobs. So Joe Biden and the National Democrats try to downplay this un-American activity. That's dangerous and it's wrong. We have laws in this country to protect against violence, to protect students. Students have a right to be protected. Jewish students, all students on campus, from harassment, from discrimination. If not, those colleges should lose their federal funding. But Joe Biden would rather waffle than act. And why is that? Why does he bow down to these pro-Hamas protesters It's because of the election coming up, and he knows he needs their votes. That's absolutely wrong. What the president ought to be doing is applying the law, returning order to campuses, and getting students back into the classroom.
This has got to end, folks. These protests on the college campuses have gone from one stance of being peaceful at one point to now inciting violence and destruction. Now, we all support everyone's First Amendment right to free speech, but this is not free speech. Again, it's incitement of violence. What we are seeing on these elite school campuses like Columbia, like UCLA, is a lot of propaganda that's being pushed by Hamas to those pro-Hamas supporters. We're seeing Nazi slogans. We're seeing death to America, death to Israel. And I would ask these protesters, you support Hamas, a terrorist organization that's funded by Iran, where a regime will stone women to death. A terrorist organization supported by Iran that is okay with using rape as a weapon of war against women. A terrorist organization that will haul away elderly people. A terrorist organization that will kill babies. This is what you support? This is un-American. It shouldn't be happening on our soil. Now, these college and university presidents have made a choice. And that choice is not to stand with their Jewish students and their Jewish faculty. Their choice has been to support a terrorist organization that goes against every American value that we have. It is a choice where they are supporting terrorism on their own campuses. These university presidents should lose their jobs. These universities should lose their federal funding. These universities should lose their donor support. And what I'm saying to businesses out there, when you see that degree coming across your desk when you're hiring for new employees, if it's Columbia, if it's UCLA, maybe you should hang out a sign that says, "Need not apply." We can no longer support these types of activities in the United States of America.
Hi, everybody. You can see how we all feel so passionate about the anti-Semitism that we see spreading across our colleges and universities, and I'll add my voice to that. But the reasons, or one of the reasons, that this is so egregious is this violates one of the greatest acts that was ever passed in our nation's history, and that's the Civil Rights Act. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says that it prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. And these colleges and universities are allowing these protesters to break the law, and their faculty in some cases. And so the answer that you've heard several of my colleagues express, and that I join with them on, is if you're going to break the law and violate Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, you're going to have your federal funds removed. Think of the research dollars that go into some of these universities. Think of the federal student aid that goes into these universities. Think of the buildings that were built with federal funds and are being built with federal funds in these universities that are letting violations, civil rights violations, and endangering the lives of Jewish students and other students on their campuses. So we had Secretary Cardona at our appropriations hearing on Tuesday. Ask for his solution. His solution is we're doing investigations. We have 150 investigations. How long is that going to take? What's the end of that? I said, do you have somebody on the campus at Columbia University that's overseeing this, that's watching what's going on? No, no. So the Biden administration doesn't even have anybody there to actually record and watch and see the civil rights violations that are occurring firsthand. That shows you the lackadaisical attitude they're having towards this. And if I had a student there, no matter what religion or race my student was, I would be afraid for their safety, and not to even mention the completion of their education. So I think we need to deal with this in the harshest terms, and that's certainly the message that I conveyed to the Secretary. Last week, while we were gone, this administration continued the war on coal with 4 extremely egregious regulations that came out, one of which will extinguish every single coal-fired power plant, no matter how much life is left in that plant. Many of them are older plants. It also will make it nearly impossible to build a new natural gas-powered power plant. So we have an administration who's telling us to drive electric cars. We've got AI coming on. We've got data centers coming on that are huge consumers of power. And this administration is saying, but you can't have baseload power that provides 30, 40% of your power if you combine both of those. So we're going to fight this through congressional action, I'm sure, but I'm sure it will be challenged in the courts as the last Clean Power Plan was, and it was defeated in the Supreme Court. This administration continues to overregulate, and last week was an example of their environmental extremism, again, coming after the hardworking men and women in my state and across this country.
The outbreak of anti-Semitism on college campuses across America right now at this moment is reprehensible. This kind of hate has no place in America. And I've got to point out the hypocrisy here. These elite universities, they tout diversity and inclusion as long as Jewish students and Jewish professors are excluded. What hypocrisy that we're seeing at this moment in our country. The First Amendment does protect speech. It does not protect the right to threaten or intimidate Jewish students, much less the violence that's occurring on campuses. Yet, that is what we're seeing across our country today. So we need to ask ourselves, why are the tax dollars of freedom-loving Americans funding these universities? Let me give you a few examples. Columbia, they breached a building, the Hamilton building, $1.2 billion last year from the federal government. UCLA, where they're using wristbands to identify anti-Israel students, nearly $1 billion. GW, a little closer here to Washington, D.C., where a Palestinian flag now hangs from the statue of George Washington, $200 million of American tax dollars going to that institution. So I have this message to send to President Biden and every single Senate Democrat. Join me, join my Republican colleagues in condemning these violent protests and defund the universities that refuse to crack down.
Leader McConnell.
Good.
Good afternoon, and I know Senator Capito alluded to this. When it comes to Title VI and defunding some of these universities, without information from the ground, as you said, Secretary Cardona didn't have people there to understand what the potential violations were of Title VI, how will you go about adjudicating whether School A or School B gets money funded or defunded, and how much money would be withdrawn?
Well, first, you notice that every one of us today had the same message with regard to the world's oldest form of hatred, anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism needs to be dealt with consequences. You've noticed a lot of the bigger donors to some of these schools have said, I think I'll just keep my money. And as several of our colleagues here have pointed out, the biggest supply of money comes from us. And so we're taking a look at how to condition that money on how they handle their campuses in situations like this. I know Senator Cotton and others had suggestions to make earlier today, and we're serious about this. We're going to take a look at what legislatively we might do to deal with this problem.
Do you have any reaction to the news that Marjorie Taylor Greene is moving forward next week with the motion to vacate Speaker Johnson from his leadership position?
Well, first, I'm relieved, as I think all of America is, that chaos in the House will be discontinued. And so that's, I think, a benefit to our country, benefit to the House, benefit to the reputation of Congress. So I'm pleased that apparently we will not have to deal with that the rest of the year.
Leader McConnell, what do you mean by that? She said she will call a motion to vacate next week unless Speaker Johnson resigns. Do you think he should resign?
No, of course not. I support Speaker Johnson. I think he's done a good job under extremely difficult circumstances.
Leader McConnell, will you call for her to abandon her effort?